We have a Ben Askren type fight coming up at lightweight because this one is a little bit funky. We have Chris Gritzmacher taking on the man himself. They call him Gifted Rafa Garcia. And Matt, I absolutely love this matchup because for Rafa Garcia, this guy came in with a full head of steam from Combate in short notice, loses to Nasrat Haqparast, 130-27, 229-28, but he landed some nice shots from the outside. He was a smaller fighter in terms of the rangier boxer that is Nasrat Haqparast. But Matt, I feel like we had a pretty good read on Rafa Garcia, and I want to give him his due. Let's throw it back to his rookie card performance. Let's reintroduce the man known as Rafa Garcia. Let's talk about Mexico's Rafa Garcia. Matt, this was a guy that back in October on early stoppage, we threw out a fan Q&A. We said, throw us your questions. We'll give you the answers. Friend of the show at Trademark MMA on Twitter, Max Friedman, threw out the question, asked about some of the prospects that were coming up in just MMA in general. So I threw out a list of prospects. Rafa Garcia fell on that list. This was a guy, former Combate lightweight champ. He was able to win the belt against Eric Gonzalez, you know, Ghost Pepper, and he defended against Humberto Bandenay, former UFC vet. And he has a couple of those grimy wins against guys that you know from the UFC. So you look at Rafa Garcia, undefeated 12-0. He was 8-0 over with Combate. Those title fights, only 3 rounds, but he's really able to bring things together. And the thing that I like out of Rafa Garcia, he's a guy out of Mexicali, Mexico, that's really kind of moved around for his training. They actually brought him in at Team Elevation. And this is going to sound crazy because you thought, well, Usman was brought in to train with Justin Gaethje to get him ready for UFC 254. They also brought Rafa Garcia in to get Justin Gaethje ready. Now, it backfired for Gaethje, but if you're a guy like Rafa Garcia, that only helps you. He trains out of the training lab with who? TJ Dillashaw, Juan Archuleta, Cub Swanson. I've seen him at Gracie Baja HQ with Naaman Gracie. I've seen him all over the place training with these high-level athletes. You'll love to see it for Rafa Garcia. His last fight was last February, the fight against Bandenay. So we haven't seen him in a long time. Again, in June, he kind of declared he was a free agent. It was about the same time that Gustavo Lopez got into his tough issue where he was still a part of Combate, ended up in the UFC. They got their Combate champion, Gustavo Lopez. They had to wait a little bit longer for Rafa Garcia. But I'm excited to see him. And if you want an exciting fighter, Rafa Garcia is the type of guy that's just going to chase you down. Like, he is like Wile E. Coyote after a carrot. I guess it was really the Roadrunner that would follow a carrot. He's like somebody going after a carrot. Like, if you're on a treadmill going after a carrot. Let's just talk about the carrots. Rafa Garcia he will find you in a cage. And listen, I think in a lot of instances, the smaller cage would probably help out a guy like Rafa Garcia. You see it in his fights. Again, the Gonzalez and the Bandenay fight are very good examples because he has a ton of finish wins and by submission as well. I mean, 7 of his 12 wins by submission. But for Rafa Garcia, when he's striking, he does a good job with his lead foot position. He really corners you. If he wants to work a takedown, maybe not the best from open space, but when he does get in the clinch, he does a great job.
And that's the problem. We talk about some wrestlers who are really good at striking their way into distance and then going for the takedown attempt, and then other wrestlers who, they just kind of put their head down and go for the takedown. Kind of like what Curtis Blades did in that last takedown attempt against Derek Lewis, where it was just so obvious what he was going for. Rafa Garcia, earlier on in the fight, he still has that explosion, and he is able to go for some of those takedowns in open space, but a lot of his bread and butter and his takedown attempts are going to come from that clinch, and he does have a really nice inside trip. It reminds me a little bit of Henry Cejudo. Now, he's not nearly at Henry Cejudo's level, of course, for wrestling, but it's one of those cheeky little takedowns that a lot of people aren't going to be able to traditionally defend because it does come from such an unorthodox position. The problem with Garcia, though, is he's not good at striking his way into the clinch to try to initiate those wrestling transitions, and when you are fighting a guy like Nasrat Haqparast, who can keep a very high volume throughout a fight, has really good cardio himself, and also has really good footwork, it's going to be tough to try to walk him down like he has been doing in his last fights. And Garcia does have that kind of zombie mentality where he's always going to be going forward no matter what. When you're fighting a guy like Nasrat Haqparast, who can not only use his feet, but also his head to try to bait you into exchanging with him in the pocket, it's going to be a tough night out for Garcia.
All right, so you get a bit of a lowdown on Rafa Garcia. He really is a special fighter, and he's going to be taking on a guy that, Matt, I feel like we had a weird read on him going into his last fight against Alexander Hernandez, because my question was, so you beat Joe Lozon in 2018, then you're supposed to fight Beneil Dariush. That fight falls out. Unfortunately, you had an injury to Gritzmacher. Then in 2019, you're supposed to take on Jesus Pinedo, but Gritzmacher's out due to ACL. And then he gets Alexander Hernandez years later. They box it out, they slug it out, and he gets knocked out in the first round. So for Chris Gruetzemacher, Matt, listen, people either love or loathe your hot takes, but I remember your hot take before the Hernandez fight as to, well, Chris Gruetzemacher is billed as a boxer, but his boxing ain't all that sexy. So what are you thinking here?
And my take was pretty spot on, wasn't it? This is the thing with Chris Gruetzemacher. You ever watch like Planet Earth documentaries? Like, I'm a big fan of them. And sometimes at the start, there'll be like a caribou, and you don't really know what's going to happen. Maybe that caribou is going to go on, live a happy caribou life. Maybe it's going to get eaten by a bunch of wolves. With Chris Gruetzemacher in his last fight, you kind of knew he was going to get eaten by a bunch of wolves because Chris Gruetzemacher is a basic fighter. He's not, there's nothing bad about that. But what Chris Gruetzemacher does is very basic. He moves forward, he throws power shots, he kind of works behind the jab, but he's very stiff with it. So it's not like he really flicks his jab out at long range. He's not a guy who can really pick you apart with it like we saw Randy Costa do, at least in the first round against Adrian Yanez. He doesn't do that with his jab. He tries to get on the inside and try to sling up power shots, but the issue with Chris Gruetzemacher is that he squares up his stance when he does that. Like, normally if you're a boxer, your feet are like this, right? You have one kind of behind the other. You're standing like this. Gruetzemacher squares his feet up. Like, he just squares them up. So his shoulders are square, and he's very susceptible to being hit when he's in that position. I know other fighters can get away with that. Like, when Poirier gets guys hurt, he can kind of square up and force them against the cage. That works when you're Dustin Poirier and you have crazy power and volume to go along with it. When you're Chris Gruetzemacher, the holes in your defense are not worth the offense in which they open. And I don't think it's going to help him in this fight against Rafa Garcia. He looked great against Joe Lozon, but go back and watch that Joe Lozon fight. Joe Lozon was so far past the hill, he couldn't even see it anymore. And Chris Gruetzemacher at least had youth on his side in that. And he was able to bust at the face of Joe Lozon. And that was one of those performances that made Gruetzemacher look better than I really think he is. And Alexander Hernandez brought him back down to earth. I know some of the matchmaking was weird, and he was supposed to fight Beneil Dariush. We all know how that Dariush fight would have gone, right? Like, the odds would have been, yeah, I see Craig's eyes. Dariush would have been, a minus 7,000?
Yeah, it would have gone just like the fight against Artem Lobov on The Ultimate Fighter. Like, that's just the tricky thing. And I mean, I look at Gruetzemacher in the UFC. He beats Abner Lavares, who's no longer in the UFC. He beats Joe Lozon. He loses by some to Chaz Skelly and Davi Hamosh. And stuff like that's going to happen. And that's understandable. You're going to get submitted by guys like that. That's all right. But it just really is tricky for me to go out there and pick a guy whose last win was what? Over 3 years ago? But like almost three and a half years ago. And then I look at the odds for this one. I wish I got Rafa Garcia earlier. He opened a minus 175. He's a minus 269 favorite at this point. For Chris Gruetzemacher, open a plus 150. He's a plus 215 right now over on the Tapologies. Matt, it's a surprise to us as it is to you. I'm going to scroll down. 976 total votes. 90% Garcia, 49% by decision, 23% by submission, 22% by knockout. For the 10% that have Gruetzemacher, 72% by decision. I think Rafa Garcia wins in every aspect of this fight. And if I'm wrong, I look like a donkey, and we're going back to Rodolfo Vieira territory when he lost, well, his first loss against Fluffy Hernandez. I'll say this, just like I said in that video. If Chris Gruetzemacher beats Rafa Garcia, I become the biggest Chris Gruetzemacher stan there's ever been out there. But for right now, I like the guy that's training with some of the biggest names in the world in Rafa Garcia that they bring into training camps to get a good feel for guys, but actually wins in the cage. I like Rafa Garcia in this one, Matt.
Hey, Grits, I wrote you, but you still ain't calling. I love my cell, my pager, and my home phone at the bottom. I couldn't imagine. I like Rafa Garcia a lot in this fight. And listen, he had one of those underrated performances his last time out. I understand it's a loss on his record, but you can gain knowledge in a loss. And he did a really good job at least countering some of the flurries of Nasrat Haqparast, because what we know Haqparast for is he's really good at darting in, blitzing, and darting out. And at least Garcia was making him pay for it on some of those occasions. Although those shots didn't put Haqparast down, I think those same shots will do more than enough to hurt Gruetzemacher. I like Garcia quite a bit in this fight.
Both of us going with the Baja California's own, Matt, Rafa Garcia to get the win. I can't wait for this fight. You get a better idea of the up-and-comers in the lightweight division. Can the veteran throw it on back? Do I become the biggest Chris Gruetzemacher fan in this entire world? Are we going to go with gifted Rafa Garcia out of a litany of different gyms? Both of us are. You let us know down below in the comment section who you're going with. And Matt, in the main event at middleweight, We have primetime Uriah Hall, a guy that just beat Anderson Silva and Chris Weidman back to back. How crazy is that? Legend Killer Tour. He's going to be taking on one really tough out in a streaking Sean Strickland. So you're not going to want to miss that. You keep locked in with Fight Night Picks, and as we always say, let's get into it.